Hey guys, Razor Gresher here. This is going to be a YouTube-only specific video that I'm making about the Unaligned set. This set is a really small set. I think it's only like 10 cards, so I just wanted to make a YouTube video about it instead of spending an entire stream to talk about a simple handful of cards. That and because this app update comes out this week, so I'm trying to get all these videos out really quick so you guys can view them before the app comes out and everyone starts experimenting. And I want to give as much knowledge as I can personally, as maybe good as I am, I don't know. But I just want to give it out to you guys so you can watch these videos in preparation for building your own decks once the app comes out. Without further ado, I'm going to give my simple disclaimer, as I usually have been before these review videos. These opinions are strictly my opinions, based on the value of what I think the card does as just a card, how I might see it based on the other cards that I have reviewed, how it's going to impact the next meta, or how it's just going to, like, based on the past meta, how I think it relates in value of what it either can replace, what it's trying to do to make the game different, how good it is going to be for the set as a whole. Now, these unaligned ones, I personally believe, are a lot more of the tech choices. So unaligned, you do see a lot more in sideboard than you do in like main decks. So that's just my personal opinion on it. You guys may have other opinions. Obviously, Unruly Mob is a very good tech choice for certain decks that really want to slow down aggression. But I mean, most of the times you don't run into a lot of attacks. It's buff damage, so that buff is a bad buff. So you might want to just put it in a sideboard so you can tech it in against those aggression ones. That's kind of my thought on how it is. Obviously, Frenzy Creeble is run a lot in aggressive decks because it's just a 6 damage attack card that is very commonly used. That one's obviously just, it's a straight attack card. You put that in your deck because it deals damage. Cool. Stuff like that isn't really tech. It's just, hey, it's damage. We'll put damage into the deck because damage wins. Damage, yay, woo! So that's kind of what I'm feeling about this. So I'm going to go on the 1 to 5 star rating about these unaligned cards for Kindred, and we will see where we go from there. All right. I hope this video is catches your eye. Give it a like. Follow the YouTube channel. Catch me on YouTube if you want to watch me play some of these new cards, watch these new fun decks. I'll be trying to stream twice a week. As we get more followers, more people watching, hopefully I'll be able to do a lot more, and I can get this community growing with you, because this game is a really fun game. I love this game. I love the community with it. Everyone's so positive about it. Everyone loves this game, which I love this game, and I want people to fully enjoy it, even if they can't get a hold of like a lot of friends to play it. That's what the digital app is for. It's for everyone to play together, and I really hope that does happen. Enough of me rambling, because I love to ramble. On to the unaligned review, shall we? Alright, the first card we have is the Battleborn Oppressor. Now, when this card was revealed online, everyone went into an uproar of amazement. Like, oh my god, finally Unaligned has a weapon rule! That's amazing! So, right away, this card is a positive card. 2 damage, remove 1 equipped item. This cannot remove items with a superior element. Now, as we've been going through, there is only 1 item per alignment that has a superior element. Most of the time, those ones are actually the good ones to run. So this one is like as good as it looks and as good as it wants to be. Eventually, as the meta starts settling a little bit, you probably are going to at least run one of this in just your main deck, because how good Grim Glider was at stopping those combo decks. You put Grim Glider back in their deck when they have like a Vine Lash out. They can't Mimic a Horror to kill you in 1 turn. So like removing it at key turns makes this card stop combo decks. Sorry about that. And that's just really, really good. But there are times when the deck just isn't running a weapon. So that's like, oh, cool, this is just 2 damage, which is really bad. So as the meta starts settling and as people start using more, I guess, non-superior cards as opposed to superior items and whatnot, as they try and just figure out what they want to do with all these new items, this one is going to see play. It's going to see a lot of impact in the game. And like I said, as those more combo synergistic decks start coming out, this item, or this attack, mumbling words, is going to see probably a lot of play. I'd probably say a 1 of in almost a lot of decks that are teching in against trying to stop those decks, especially like moving Crystal Core, or move this to deal Crystal Core, and then deal your 6 damage, as opposed to like trying to do 2 attacks and stuff like that. Just something like that where, because it removes it. It doesn't shuffle back into the deck. It actually removes it. Where a lot of weapon removal outside of Mountain, like Weapon Master, is just shuffle it back into their deck, so they can draw it again. It's just removed. It's gone. They either have to find a way to put it back in their deck, or put it back in their hand, or something that is in their core set to use that item again, which could be really difficult. I know there's a lot of action recovery cards in a lot of the sets nowadays, so I mean, maybe removing it isn't that detrimental. But I'm gonna give it a 4.5 star. Just because, A, it's also elemental, which means it runs in the elemental family. You can use the cards as like Fetch an Elemental, or if there's other things that run with elementals. it can be used in that. It's not just a base card. It has a family associated with it, so you can use that synergy with other family mechanic cards to play this card or bring it back and do multiple fun things with it. But yeah, based on how many weapons there are out, how many good weapons there are, this card was detrimentally needed for the set. Because if you weren't running Mountain, you were not afraid to play a weapon. Now people should be a little worried about playing weapons because this card exists, which means, hey, if you're not playing against Mountain, you have a chance of your deck just being hit really hard with a weapon removal. So you like have to build a deck with maybe 2 weapons or wait to get the weapon back in case cards like this happen. This is going to be a really good card. I think it's going to impact the game and change the game format quite a lot just because of the presence of this card. And it is uncommon, so it's not difficult to pull from a pack or people to buy or shard or whatever they want to do. So it's going to help change the meta, change the game, just because it exists. Because it exists, even if you're not running it or playing against it, just the thought of like, oh, he might be running it, I better play around it just in case it does happen. Like, just that much of a presence has it that this card is going to impact the game in a major way. And I'm so happy they made it unaligned because everyone needs a chance to be able to remove items. In my opinion, I think it was much needed to really well round out the game as opposed to just making Mountain another weapon removal based set and having that one just be the dominant one. So I'm really happy about this card. I'm really excited to see it. Next one, Battering Ram. Is that a machine or is that a rope? I think it's a machine. I think it's a machine. So we have 4 clunky corners, 1, 2, 3, 5. At the start of your turn, deal damage to your target if they have 6 or more cards in their hand. Now this one, as an unaligned card, like I said, I believe these are more tech choice cards. These are more cards where you put in your sideboard and you put them in after you see your opponent's deck. This one, as opposed to all the other unaligned cards that we have out there that mess with people's hands, all this other stuff. I mean, there's a consistent buff out there that is, if they have more than 5, which is essentially 6 or more, in their hand, it just deals 2 damage to them. That's a consistent buff. I believe it actually belongs to the Kriebel family now, or maybe it's the Umbron family. I don't know. I think it does belong to a family now, which is really fun. But I think that one is going to be a lot better than this one. I mean, 6 or more. It's better than Kriebel Jester, where it was 7 or more. You discard down. It's better than when we're coming up, which is 8 or more. Move their hand back. This one is just damage if they have cards in their hand. But I think the other buff is still going to be a lot better to run. Mind you, like that one is just 2 consistently. But this is like 4 corners, where it's only going to hit if they have 6 or more, and so is the other buff only going to hit if they had 6 or more. Yes, it deals like 3 and 5, so like later on it gets a little worse, but it's like, okay, I'll just remove it before it gets to that point, or I'll just play around having 5 cards in my hand, which, as I've said before, is not that difficult to do. Just have 5 cards in your hand and still play really well. A lot of the decks play mid-range, or like really tempo-based or aggression, so they're not going to have a whole lot of cards in their hand. But I mean, just compared to that very first buff they made, where it's if you have more than 5 cards, deal 2 damage. That's just better than this buff. That's just better than this buff. Because it lasts for more than 4 turns, and I mean, yes, you can play around it with damage prevention, but the fact that it's continuous, it's a constant buff that stays out there, so you can do stuff with it. You can remove it with Night Lurker if you need to, all those other things, as opposed to meeting the same condition, essentially doing the same thing, and only lasting for 4 things of damage. It's just really not worth it, unless for some reason you put it into a tech deck and you're running all these machines. Because I think machines and robot are the more tech-oriented family. I don't think they're really spread out as opposed to the other like elementals, beasts, and stuff like that. So like you can't even really do a whole lot outside of tech with this machine card, and I just don't think Battering Ram is going to see a lot of play. I like the design, I like thought behind it, but the early damage as opposed to the late damage, like I would have liked to see this be like 3, 3, 3, 5. That way it does beat out that continuous buff that deals 2 damage at the beginning of your turn. It's the same wording as this essentially, but it starts out with dealing more damage, and it is only for 4 turns. That one was continuous. I would have just liked to see this one be a little more damaging if it is only going to last for 4 hits, as opposed to this keeps hitting you until you remove it type of thing. So I think I'm just going to give this a 1-star rating. Yeah, it could have been a lot better. It could have tried to compete with its predecessor, but in the long run, I just don't think it's going to, which is kind of sad, because I think that if they're going to make these new cards, they need to put them on par level or do something, unless, like I've been stating before, they eventually have enough more sets and they start rounding this stuff out. I get it, when you play draft, you probably only play with like the Kindred set, so on its own, this is a different card. You have to have a card like this. But if you're like in constructed in tournament style, this is probably not going to see play compared to other cards that essentially do the same thing but better. So I'm just going to give this a 1-star rating. Next one, Citadel Safe House. We have a clunky corner, which is non-dormant. That's what I mean by there's no X on it. It's still active and you can do stuff with it. If it's X, it does nothing. It's like card text is blank. That's what I mean by non-dormant. A rotation, or the second one is 3. Corner 1, defendability, draw 1 card. Corner 2, cards cannot deal more than rotation damage to you. I think this is a really well-designed card. It's one of those where you don't have to like play it and try and wait out the perfect turn. You can play this and have it just sit there for like 3 or 4 turns just doing nothing, and then when you see someone about to line up a really big hit or about to line up like a really big combo, they start doing this. If they don't remove this, because it just says cards, it doesn't say action cards, it doesn't say combo cards, cards cannot deal more than rotation damage to you. So think about this, you play this down and it stays out there, it's just a normal buff and your opponent can't remove it for some reason, and all of a sudden they're like, alright, I'm about to go off, I'm going to lay Vine Lash, cool. I'm like, okay, well, let's run Vine Lash is going to go off. I'm going to activate my defendability. I'll draw 1 card, which is, a lot of benefit for waiting that long. And then rotate it. Vine Lash now does 3. That's an 11-point damage reduction. Like, that's insane. That is so good. It's a location card, which means that people that run locations or do things with locations, it's still just a really good card. And it's not like this is damage reduction for the next turn. It's they cannot deal more than that damage. They can't improve it. They can't use damage bypassing things to increase the damage. It can't deal more than that. And because of that, because it is one of those, you can lay it out and your opponent goes, okay, if I wanted to do like a combo or if I wanted to have a one-shot kill, I need to remove this buff first before I do that, which like kind of sets them back a turn. And all it is really, it's like it does nothing while it's out there. It's literally just you sit there and you go, your move. You know what I can do. You know how my good defense is. What's your play? However, because of that, because it's more of a combo stopping card, I don't think you're probably going to run more than 1 in a deck if you are. Because, like I said, this card is really only meant to more stop the combo stuff. More to stop the Mimicking Horror, Vine Lash, Mimicking Horror, Two-Top Tribunal, things that are like, I'm going to hit you for 14 in a turn. So, like, you want this if you are one of those consistently getting low decks where you don't have a whole lot of healing, you're putting on a lot of pressure, and you're like at 10 health. Maybe if you're running a Morgok deck, you run a lot of these just so that people can't deal more than 10 damage to you, and you feel safe being at like 12. And if they attack you on that one turn, you'll go down to like 6, and then you get all the benefits from being below 10. Maybe like that's what this card is also meant to do. But I see this card mostly like 95% being played as a combo prevention card. With a family, which means you get to do really fun stuff with it. I think I have reviewed the Mountain Order before. There is stuff that's like, hey, bring back location cards or use location cards as a benefit. So like in a location specific deck, you might just take this in because it's a good defense card for locations, and it just sits out there for you to utilize as, hey, like I have these location buffs out because it doesn't rotate until you want it to rotate. Maybe put it in there just like a mitigaming card draw. You defend it, draw 1, and then the next turn you're like, hey, cool, I have a really good defense for 1 turn as I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I think it's like a 4-star card. It's just a solid, well-designed card that gets bumped up from a 3-slot to a 4-slot because it has its purpose to shut down combo decks. So I see this card being teched in almost in every sideboard at any tournament that is not advanced constructed. In advanced constructed, if you start seeing like we did in the U.S. Nationals and all that stuff, people running Mimicking Horror Triano, people running like really big, heavy-hitting one-turn kills deck. This card is a safe one to tech in because those cards you don't really want to manipulate their hand. You want to just prevent them from killing you for like 20 health, and this card does that. It's a really well-designed defense card. Just because it says also cards, not action or combo cards, just flat-out cards. That's amazing. That's really well done. 4-star card. I have a feeling this card is going to see play as the meta starts changing. It'll flip between being a tech-in of 1 in your main deck to just being more of a sideboard as the combo decks may have started dwindling out because Citadel Safe House it cancels them out entirely. It cancels them and they can't do anything about it. I'll give this a 4-star card. Conjurer's Lab, another location. Awesome. Reduce your target's healing received by 1. Interesting. Okay. I mean, this is essentially it's a little worse than Cream of Potion Master, but it's consistent. It's very consistent, mind you. That's why it's only one. If it was more than one, it would be running every deck possible, because this is just it prevents your opponent from recovering after you put on a lot of pressure. I can actually see this card maybe being teched one of in like a very aggressive style deck, kind of how Cream of Potion Master was teched into a lot of the aggro decks too for one of. Like, hey, I'm going to apply this pressure, but then as I need to draw cards, I really can't have you heal, so I'll put this down on the turn when I'm just trying to, like, I'm out of ammo and I need to recuperate, make it so that you can't heal. But compared to that, also, in those type of decks, you really only need that like major reduction for 2 or 3 turns, which is what Cream of Potion Master did very efficiently, as you draw your cards to get more damage done while they can't really heal, because that's preventing them from doing that. This card, it has its place. It really does have its place. If you think about this, if there are a lot of like micro heals, like especially in nature, where nature doesn't have like a big burst heals like Astral does, like Tech does, like even Mountain does, all this stuff that just heals you for a bunch, you know, all at once. Preventing one of that is not that much. But if you're running into nature a lot, teching this into nature to prevent them from, like, hey, Stumped Shaman, first you lay it, heals you for nothing. Then it heals you for another -1. Then it heals you for another -1. That's essentially -3 healing on a Stumped Shaman, which only heals them for 4, when it would heal them for 7. Root Singer only heals them on their third corner for 1. Mind you, Root Singer is normally paying for card draw, but you get the gist. But, I mean, just the fact that it's continuous could be beneficial. It's, like you said, it's continuous, -1. Some decks mightn't even see it as a threat. But that's why they give it a location, so that location decks might be able to use this, which it's just consistent buff out there, it's consistent location. You might run one of this in a location deck depending on, like, if you're running into a lot of more long, grindy meta games. And if the meta starts going into a more tempo-based or long games as opposed to just hard aggression, this card might find a place in a lot of decks just to prevent them from recuperating as you're trying to kill them with normal damage. It could stop a lot of actually mill decks. Just put this in there and prevent them from healing back up after you're dealing your damage continuously, because that's what mill does. Mill just, it out heals you and just makes it so they get a lot more value out of their heal than you do from your damage. So having this get -1 on almost all cards in their hand, which is what they wanted to do, could really shut them down. It forces them to try and kill it. And just the fact that it's part of a family gives it a little more boost to me. I'm probably going to give this like it's a solid card. I'll give it a 3. I'll give it a 3 because Cream of Potion Master does what it does better. Like I said, because you only want it for like specific turns for them not to heal when they get low, as opposed to this one. I mean, you could lay it early, mid game, and it's still just like, it's more of an annoyance than an actual threat. So your opponent's just like, man, I really wish I could get rid of that, but I'd much rather get rid of that Colossi Ritual Site. Or, oh man, he's got a Prism Tech Cannon. I could remove that, or this thing that's just minorly inconveniencing my heals. So it's kind of one of those things where your opponent won't see it as threatening, but as time rolls on, you'll see that if it stays out there and they're trying to heal, if it can prevent your opponent from healing 6, that's really good. That's just really good. That's basically 6 damage you did with this one card just for being out there. So think about it that way. Think about it that way. As minus in heals adds to your damage. 3-star card. I think it has its place. Yeah, solid card. Solid card. Crushing Charger. This is the one I was talking about with hand size. So it's a beast card. Really cool. I'm glad they made it, this for beast, because beast, as I've been saying before, is like in like 50% of the entire new Kindred set. So it can be utilized with a lot of really good cards. As I did the Nature one a few days ago, there's a card that literally searches for a beast card. So if you're facing a more deck like this, swap it in, search for this card at the right time to lay it, and your opponent's like, whoa, you always have that card. It reads, if the recipient has 8 or more cards in their hand, move them to their deck, and then move the top 5 cards from their deck to their hand. Now, I emphasize the word move because this is not considered drawing or discarding or anything like that. Anything that has the play, like if your opponent discarded a card or if your opponent drew a card, none of that happens because moving is not considered discarding or drawing, which means the new Withering, mini Withering for Undead doesn't make them take damage when they essentially draw their top 5 cards. It doesn't happen because they're moved. It's the same way if you're playing a lot of Astro cards. If you're Yokona Archaeologist, if one of the top 5 cards is moved your hand and it's one of them, you don't get to reveal it to restart a buff because it wasn't drawn. That's how that card works. This one, it does have its own place. Sorry about that. It does have its own place. It is a little more than 7, which is kind of a little bit of a bummer, because people are already playing around 7 cards. So getting them to also have 8, like one more than that, is a lot more difficult. And mind you, in a sense, it's a lot better than Creeble Jester, because Creeble Jester, it's like, hey, you have to discard down to 7. And it's like, okay, cool, there's a lot of cards that I haven't been using for a while, I'll just pitch them into the graveyard, and that's fine. I'll keep the cards that I think will help me outlast the long game. As opposed to this one, where it's like, hey, you have 8 cards, cool. You know that hand of really good cards you've been saving up for a certain amount of time? Nope, you have to essentially draw 5 new cards and hope one of them was really good that you can use now. So it's like you completely reset their style after they've been trying to save up a really big hand. So like I said, it does have its place. It's a lot more difficult to play against than Creeble Jester, as everyone's always trying to keep their hand around 7 now, unless you're playing like a combo deck or a mill deck where you draw cards and you try and outvalue them. So I think this card, I want to say it's the 2.5, where in a lot of places it is just going to replace Creeble Jester, because it essentially does the same thing a little better. It's a little more harder to pull off, but the only time you ran Creeble Jester was when an opponent was consistently having like 11 or 12 cards in their hand, which is more than 8. It's more than 8. Mind you, like, oh, those cards are discarded, cool, but there is a lot of graveyard recursion in the game now. You have Root Singer, you have Chimchu Infiltrator, you have a lot of the new combos or just action cards that say return a card from your graveyard to your hand or to the field or something like that. So making them not put those cards in the discard to get that benefit, to draw a whole new hand, is better than Creeble Jester in that way. It shrinks their hand down from whatever they had to 5, not just to the 7 they wanted to keep. But yeah, it's never going to see main deck. It's never, almost ever going to see main deck if you have a sideboard to use. If you have a sideboard to use, this one is like an auto-include in sideboards. It might even replace Creeble Jester in sideboard, like I said, because it just resets their hand as opposed to making them discard, and how Creeble Jester's discard could be beneficial to some decks with the graveyard recursion. So maybe I'll bump this up to a 3 because of that, because it's essentially it's not a better Creeble Jester, it's just a different Creeble Jester. That could be better in some circumstances. You never know. You never know. But I do think this is almost an auto-include in every sideboard deck, but I don't think it's ever going to have the potential or impact to make it to a main deck, which means on the app where there is no sideboard, it's probably never going to see play. Unless you are consistently running into people that are playing like Granite or combo decks that have large hands at all times. That's probably the only time you're ever going to try and tech it in, if you're consistently facing those style of decks. But it's a good card. It's a good card. It does something different than Creeble Jester, but it's not worse or better. It's just different, which is exactly what I really like about this, what I'm really happy they did, to not just try and improve or worsen the card. They took the same mechanic but put a new twist on it to make it a different variant so that it can broaden the horizons of everyone playing this game. So I like it. I really am happy this card is out. All right, Draga Hoarder. 3 clunky corners, beast buff. Awesome, more beasts. Draw 1 card when this enters play, so already immediate value. That's good. Your cards cannot be discarded by other heroes' card effects. Now, what I really like about this is, A, it's not a consistent buff, and it's clunky corners. So it's not like the next 3 turns your cards can't be discarded. It's your opponent literally has to attempt you from discarding your cards 3 times. Which, in a lot of decks, they may only have like 1 source of discard. So this might be overkill on 3 corners. Maybe you only want to like 2, because that'd be powerful. But 3, if you're like facing a mill deck, if you're placing a lot of greedy gem roughs, this card just like stops it and shuts that deck down. However, as I was saying before, this card gets around it in a huge way. Because this card does not discard. Crushing Charger does not discard, it moves them. So if you have Draga Hoarder and you have like 11 cards, you still move them to your deck and move 5 cards to your hand. So it like completely negates Draga Hoarder. So as Creeble Jester has been popular, Draga Hoarder will be popular. As Draga Hoarder will be popular, Crushing Charger will then take over for it. And then if Crushing Charger gets way more popular, people probably won't run Draga Hoarder, which then people might go back to Creeble Jester, which then will cycle through those 3 in an endless cycle of trying to compete with one another, which I think is a really fun rock, paper, scissors, almost, and all on the line cards and all tech cards. But I want to say that this is probably the way the meta. It's going to start out being a really effective card. It's going to start out by being really good in decks like Granite or even Triana, where they just continuously draw a lot of cards and hold a lot of cards. But then Crushing Charger is going to become more prominent than Jester, which means this card does nothing for those. It doesn't stop Jester, it doesn't stop Charger, it does nothing. Mind you, it's a beast. Mind you, it also draws you a card. But it's one of those where it's like, yeah, it's awesome. It's going to be it's going to be main decked into this to prevent you from your card loss. And then Crushing Charger comes in like, wow, this card literally did nothing. It sat there the whole time. It was just, I get to lay a buff that draws me a card. That's all it does. And it's meh. So, I mean, it was a much needed card before Crushing Charger came out. If Crushing Charger didn't exist, this card would be an amazing card to prevent that. But because Crushing Charger does exist, I want to give this like a two-star rating. Because, as I said before, in the Rock, Paper, Scissors format, all this stuff is going to cycle, and then people are not going to run Creeble Jester, and they're going to run Crushing Charger, which makes this card dead. It makes it a dead card unless you're facing a very, very specific mill deck. And in tournaments, you're never going to see mill. In the games take too long, you're never going to see mill efficiently win. And they're always going to save their buff removal for this one, essentially. I mean, that's it. That's it. I mean, maybe cards like mill will become more prominent where your deck gets discarded, and then that doesn't, and then this card will be better. I know I've seen a lot of nature cards, and there's even some storm card or mountain cards in the past that say your opponent discards the top whatever cards in their deck as they start doing this. But we'll see. But I'm going to only give this a 2-star. When prominently I thought it was going to be like a 4-star card, but because Crushing Charger, it killed this card. That one card made this card almost null and void. Until we see what the format is, until we see how people are milling one another as opposed to just dealing damage. Maybe it's a one of in the tech, I don't know. In the sideboard, I don't know. Fount of Misfortune, 3, and then 3 non-dormant corners. Cards in all heroes discard piles have burn. Corner 1 is damage to your target. This one is phenomenal. As I've been saying almost this entire, well, not almost, a good portion of this video, card recursion or graveyard recursion is becoming a very prominent thing in this game. And literally, if all the cards in your discard pile have burn, cards like Root Singer, cards like Chimchu Infiltrator, cards like the new dead one that brings 4 undead back, or Dread that brings 4 undead buffs back, that can't do anything. Regrowth can't do anything for at least the next 4 turns. So when your opponent is trying to really kill you down, has a lot of stuff in their graveyard really late in the game, and you don't care, you're playing the game out normally and whatnot, and having this card in when someone is continuously bringing cards back from their graveyard, laying this down and be like, hey, for 4 turns, you can't do that. You have to play with what's in your hand or remove this buff. That is amazing. This card is a one-of-a-kind, very original card that needs to be prominent in this game. It might even be so prominent that you include just one of in your deck to prevent all of those crazy graveyard recursion cards. I mean, if you think about it, if someone does try and make an Insight deck with Sepid Queen, where, hey, I'm decked out, but I always get to return an attack card. With this card, no, you don't. For the next 4 turns, you can't use that. That buff is nothing now. You cannot return anything from your discard pile. Mind you, it doesn't get around like, hey, all your cards have burn, so store effects still catch them because they haven't reached the discard pile yet, so you still get to catch them with store, which is fine. But it's the simple fact that cards like Root Singer, cards like Chimchu Infiltrate, cards like Regrowth, all those cards that are very dominant in this game, are very prominent on just keeping the game consistent and going, this just shuts them down. This does nothing for them. They become dead cards, which then makes your opponent go, well, I'm just going to draw, or I'm going to change out my game plan for the next 4 turns if they cannot remove it. It's also a location, which means you can use that family to your advantage if you have cards that run with locations. That's awesome. I'm going to give this, I'm going to give it a 4.5-star card because it's one of a kind, very unique, does shut down a lot of prominently strong decks that run graveyard recursion. You're going to almost sideboard one of these in almost all sideboard decks. I can guarantee it's going to be an auto-include in sideboard. And it might become a lot more prominent, especially with all the stuff that's coming out now with Graveyard Recursion, to just include one of in a deck. Mind you, it'll cancel out your own Graveyard Recursion, so you have to play around it slightly like that, but at the same time, hurting your opponent is way more beneficial than just hurting you. So if you have it in your deck, you're obviously not going to run a whole lot of Graveyard Recursion, which is fine, so that when you draw this, you're not getting the fallout from it. And it's all on your opponent, which is really good. I think this card has the potential as a tech card to be a main deck card the way the game has been developing. That's why I give it like a 4.5, because it's a good card. It's a very good card. Shield Wall. All clunky corners, 1, 2, 3, 6. Reduce damage received from attacks by rotation. Now, this one I think is going to see a decent amount of play. I mean, you think about it, it's not going to stop buff damage. It's not going to stop like a Draga Scorcher or a Vine Lash or stuff like that just deals damage. Like Insect Swarm will not tick this because that buff damage will go right through. Which, if you run this in like, if you tech it into say Mountain deck and you have Mountain Fort and they're running like, you know, green. Mind you, green runs very few attacks. It has in the past. Now they've been coming out with a lot more attacks, so maybe it will. Maybe the game will change. But switching Shield Wall out for a Mountain Fort means that Insect Swarm will not take your Mountain Fort away in 4 turns, and that was a dead card. This will prevent them from dealing their burst damage. This will prevent them from doing like their one-hit combos when like attack or really aggression styles like the tech and the aggro dolos. All of their cards that damage you are from attacks. So being able to prevent 4 attacks as opposed to like small poke micro damage from buffs, this could be a really good card. It's a tech choice. I wouldn't run it over a lot of the base damage prevention buffs that are out there, like Monster Defender, Bubblefish, all this stuff, because those are just 3 turns. Those 3 turns are for recuperating. Those 3 turns are for sitting behind your wall and trying to draw or heal or do something like that. This is more like you would tech it in if you're playing against heavy aggression. Obviously, you'd also tech in like Unruly Mob and Creeble Decoy, all the stuff that really stop their attacks from attacking you. But I mean, just having a better wall than something that was not preventing as much, especially if they're a really heavy attack one, is decent. I think it's a really good one to have in this set. In draft, you're going to almost see this all the time in draft. It's a really good pick in draft. I think is like a 5-star card in draft for defense because there's not almost any defense in draft. So this card is like what you want to grab. But as opposed to the meta, I'm going to give it. Man, I've been talking all this positive thing. Now I look at it, I'm like, it's like a 2-star card in the current meta. It's mostly to sideboard. It's never going to see main deck over your main damage prevention buffs. It's not part of a family, so you can't run the family cool synergistic cards with it either. It's just, I mean, it's good for stopping aggro decks. If you're not going against aggro decks, this card is a way worse defensive buff than all of your other ones can be. So, that's what it is. It's a 2-star buff that you may include in a sideboard if you are seeing very aggressive attack decks start storming the meta and have a lot of high win rates. You put this in the sideboard to tech against it to make your deck last a little longer. That's what I think it is. It's like a 2-star card. Alright, Umbron Barkeep. So we have an Umbron card. Surprise, Umbron is unaligned, as we're seeing a lot more of that. 2 healing, draw 2 cards if your enemy is holding more cards than you. Now this, I actually really like this card. When you think about Umbron Informant was good. A lot of people just use Umbron Informant if it drew you 2 or 3 cards. 2 or 3 cards is fine. Any more than that, and it was astounding. Obviously, you got the major benefit from it if your opponent had a large hand size. That's when it was mostly run, or in decks like the Tower Cassini deck, where you emptied your hand a lot and you wanted to continuously draw to get the benefits from drawing and revealing defend cards. Then, like, a lot of drawing is more important. This one is your opponent could have 1 more card than you, or even like the same amount, because when you play it, it's out of your hand, which means you have 1 less card, and then you draw 2, which means you have a card advantage on your opponent. It's healing, so it's meant to be more of a defensive recuperating card as opposed to attacking. I feel if it was attack, almost everyone would run this card, because this deck, having it be attack, almost immediately goes in all aggression style decks, because your hand is always going to be less than your opponent. You're going to deal the damage, you're going to draw cards to deal more damage. It would be like insane if it was attack. So I'm really happy it's only healing. To kind of like slow down, it's a very recuperating card. It's what I'm trying to say in like 50 sentences or less. But I think this card is going to see play. I think it's actually good enough to be in a main deck as well if you're, because a lot of decks lately do not have a whole lot of card draw. There's very few cards outside of like some buffs that draw you cards, or like there's now cards that fetch you specific ones in your deck, which are really good. But just a card that, if used properly, is you draw 2 for 1. A lot of people would take that. That's cycling through your deck, which is just really good. I want to give this, I want to give this a 4-star buff, or a 4-star defend card for Unaligned. It even has the Umbron, So as soon as Umbron gets more fleshed out, this card is going to be really good in that Umbron family. We'll see how it is. I'm still not convinced that Umbron is fully there yet. I feel like there's like 2 or 3 families that are fully not fished out yet to where they want to be with what their family's trying to do. There's just not enough cards for them, or the cards that they have aren't good enough to be played against other decks to make them a viable concept. And I feel like Umbron is one of them. Kriebel's probably another one where they're all very technical cards that don't have a full concept evolved around them. So I don't think this is the family mechanic really matters that much right now. That's fine, because this does not revolve around the family. It's just a solid card. In games like Hearthstone, you have Mage's card, Arcane Intellect, which you pay it to draw 2 cards. That was almost immediately run. There is Magic cards that just you play the 1 card to draw 2. Essentially, that's what this one is. It has conditional because obviously there's no payment involved in it like those other games. So it's just conditional. If your opponent's holding more cards than you get to draw 2. So I mean, besides that, it could also just be like a minor 2 healing. But you're gonna run this, I'd say 2 or 3 copies almost in a main deck. Like, that's how good this card is. It's a main deck card. It's not something you sideboard ever. This is a main deck card like Frenzied Kriebel was for damage. This one is a card run in aggro decks, in mid-range decks, where you want to cycle through your deck to find the certain cards. And card draw is just that good. This card is going to see almost a lot of play, and it's a common card, which means everyone's going to have it, which is awesome. They're giving these really standard, really solid cards to the common set so that everyone can build a strong deck without having to open a lot of packs or spend a lot of money. It gives a fair chance to the free-to-play players. And I really like this card. Fiscus Key. I believe this is the last one because now we're on to the final item. Fiscus Key. It's only 1 slot, and it obviously has no mastery because it's unaligned. But it's an unaligned item, guys, which means this can go. Well, obviously items can go in any deck, but like an unaligned item that's never been done before, which is amazing. Defendability: rotate an action buff on any hero 1 step forward. If it was another hero's buff, move this item to your deck. Now, I have personally had a lot of fun with this item alone. The fact that it basically does what people were splashing time in for. Like Fountain of Time and like Chrono Warper maybe is the one that you can rotate your opponent's buffs to your final corner. But like this can be used in a multitude of ways. You can speed up your own buffs to make them like get to their final corner faster. So if you run a lot of 4-corner buffs and you want to just speed stuff up, it works really well that you're like waiting for stuff. Cards that in nature, like the Egg Chamber one, where it's like, oh, it needs to get to the 4th corner. If you have this in there, that's only like 2 turns instead of 3. Jumping ahead 1 turn with a really good buff is very efficient. And the fact that it's not just only your buffs, if it was, it'd be very limited. But the fact is like, hey, your opponent's buffs. So think about this. Think about if you have this item out and someone lays a Storm Shaman. Okay, my turn. I use this ability. Your Storm Shaman now rotates. This just shuffles back into my deck. It's not discarded. You get to draw it again and keep redoing it, which is what's so good. Then on their opponent's turn, the Storm Shaman cycles out, and they didn't get the benefit. Colossi Ritual Site, same thing. Stuff like that where like they're building up a turn with power buffs or damage prevention stuff, and you just go, nope, you don't get that for an extra turn that you want to. Like, so it's very defensive. It's very offensive. It's a very well-rounded item that I believe is going to see quite a bit of play. Obviously, you can't put items in the sideboard. That's part of the rules. So this card is never going to see sideboard because of the rules. But I do believe this deck or this key has a place in a lot of decks, and it's going to find its way into a very situational. A lot of decks that are just like, man, I really should just tech in one of these keys if my opponent's running a lot of these heavy-hitting synergy cards, or if they're running a lot of buffs that I don't want them to have active on their turn or like get benefit from it on their turn. Yeah, I think this is a 4-star weapon, maybe a 4.5 because it is unaligned. It's a defendability and an attackability and whatnot. It can shuffle back into your deck, and because of the versatility of it, this is an amazing card. I am super happy about this card. I super like the fact that it's a very simplistic card. You look at a lot of the base heroes from the Awakening set, like almost every alignment had a hero that's like, hey, rotate an action buff forward that you control. So since it's like getting that with the key, you add that ability that almost every base hero had to an item. That's fine. And then giving it like an extra nudge to really put it into the rare spot, really give it that offensive and defensive abilities of manipulating your opponent's side of the board as well. Just from my experience from running it, I ran it in a Storm deck, and you guys will not believe how stupid it is. to have this in play, lay Thunderslug, and then use the defend ability to rotate Thunderslug 1 forward. So you remove 3 buffs with Thunderslug when, like, obviously you lay it for 1 and then your opponent's like, oh, I'm not going to lay any more buffs, whatever, you can kill these 2, I don't care. Like, they try and remove it and you only get 1 buff from Thunderslug. This card makes Thunderslug 3 removal. Like, it's nuts. That is so good. Yeah, I love this. I love this card. I wish I could give it a 5-star, but it's not a groundbreaking, not a card you specifically build a deck around. But it's a solid card. It's going to see a lot of play. I know I'm going to play it a lot. I'm going to try and splash it into a lot of decks. Just like, I'm like 29 cards. What card do I put in there? Fiscus Key. Done. Go. Let's hit play. Let's see what I can do with these opponents. It's going to get you a lot more value than you think if your deck is not an aggressive style deck where you don't try and kill them by turn 10. Where you're playing the long game. You have card synergy to rotate back in your deck, and you get that full value out of Fiscus Key for like 2 or 3 cards. Think of it as not really buff removal, but buff temperamental removal, where they'll still get the benefit from the corner, but they won't get it when they wanted to get it, say. So it could be a lot of fun. It could be a lot of fun, especially mess with Astral, make their combos not rotate out in the properly way, so their top card of their discard pile is completely different from what they wanted it to be. It's a lot of fun when you think about it in a very broad spectrum of what this card has potential to do. That being said, guys, that is my Unaligned video. I hope this was informative to you. I really hope you like me doing these videos. I love doing these videos. I love talking about the cards. Unfortunately, this is a YouTube one, so I couldn't talk with you while I was doing it. But it's just a very, very fun thing to do. When new sets come out, these new cards, you start thinking about them before you can actually get a hold of them and play them yourself. So all those thoughts are in your head, and you want to talk about them. You want to get them out of the board. That's why I'm doing these videos. I wanted to do these videos to share my opinions, get them out of the board. Maybe even like you guys are watching them going, wow, I never thought about that card being used that way. Or like, wow, maybe I could build a concept around what he was saying with this one card because I never thought of merging it with some of these other cards. Maybe you haven't a whole lot of time to watch, like, to delve into all these new sets, or you just started playing and you really have no idea what Kindred's all about. I hope these videos were very informative to you, and I hope that you like my entertainment value for them. I'm going to keep doing these. I'm going to have the whole lineup of the stuff on here by the time this video gets deployed on YouTube. So hopefully you can watch them all in order if you just have time. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I love watching these at work. Awesome, dude. Awesome. I'm glad I can be that value for you while you're bored doing your job. Hey! No, but seriously, I'm really happy about this. I can't wait till the app goes live later this week. We can all start experiencing these really fun, really synergistic decks. I'm also free for discussion on Twitch. Send me a chat if you're like, I know someone has already sent me one. Hey, I think I have a really cool deck. Do you mind taking a look at the deck list? Give me your thoughts on it. I would love to. I would love to discuss decks with you. I would love to be like, hey, I built this deck. It wasn't working right. I have some problems with this. Any recommendations on card replacements? I would love that. I would love to hear from you guys. Build this community. Get everyone talking about deck ideas as opposed to just sitting there going, the deck's not working, scrap it, try and build a new one. No, work on the deck. Make it your own. Don't just go straight for the meta-breaking decks. Don't just go for the top 5. Hey, these ones win. We'll play those all the time to climb ladder. I want this, when the app comes out, for everyone to be explorative on their deck building. I want everyone to come up with crazy stuff because I know that's what I'm going to do. And I want to see a variety of decks before we finalize the top 5 that go to tournaments and break the rules and all this other fun synergy stuff. So I really hope you guys enjoy these videos that I'm making. I love making them for you. I don't know what else to say other than I really hope you guys are having as much fun as I am on these. So thank you guys very much for watching. I will see you out on the app, and I will hopefully see you on Twitch. Have a good night, guys.